Did you know the new 2-star dungeons we just got in the West were 20 times harder when they first launched in Korea? I experienced the chaos of the original Korean release firsthand, so I thought it would be fun to show you the differences between the two versions. Some of these mechanics will even make a comeback in the upcoming Dimensional Trials, so the Mythic Plus systems we are getting soon. So this video might also help you to prepare in advance here. So let's start with Voidwastes. One of the mechanics here is the laser beam, which you just have to block so it doesn't hit the boss. In the current version there is no real coordination required, and it's almost impossible to get even 30 stacks. But in the original version the laser beam had to be bounced between two players continuously. Almost all the time you had close to 30 stacks, so you had to be really careful here. To make things worse, there were no visible stack indicators above your head, and the boss wouldn't lose stacks automatically. You had to be incredibly careful to prevent the laser hitting the boss, because there was no way that the stacks from the boss go away, and as soon as the boss had 30 stacks you would all wipe. But the most drastic change though was the major mechanic, the yellow breath attack. In the current version the player closest to the boss gets always the yellow orb and needs to aim at two pillars. Like, I think the mechanic is even easier than in the 1-star dungeon Cursed Wasteland. Okay, so how was it in the original version? The principle was the same. So you still had to destroy the pillars, but now you had first of all to clear 3 pillars. Then you didn't know who would get the yellow orb. That would be completely random, but that's all fine. What made the mechanic so hard was that in addition every other player had a massive purple ring around them. If the ring would hit another player, they would be feared for 6 to 9 seconds. The fear duration at the beginning was absolutely ridiculous. Okay, so as soon as the mechanic started, you had to spread out so you don't fear each other. And then of course you had to get out of the zone, which will be attacked by the breath attack. The coordination here required was insane, but it was also one of the most fun mechanics I've ever played. This gets then of course even harder if the boss is around 30% HP, because you will do this mechanic then twice in a row. Someone else is getting an orb, everyone has to move and so on. Just a lot of coordination was required, but it was also a lot of fun always. Next up we have Island of Terror, the first 2-star dungeon they released. This one was so difficult that it took players hundreds of attempts to clear it, and the mechanics didn't even change that much. But all of the mechanics had just far less room for error. Okay, so the fireball mechanic was mostly the same, but in the original version the stun it caused lasted much longer. You always needed a bow player with Purifying Touch to remove the stun of the tank, otherwise you would always get hit by the following fury attack. Okay, then the boss always calls down the meteors. Now, these comets hit like a truck. Players who got hit directly would often die instantly. So here you already had to be really careful. Okay, then the smoke appears and that was another challenge. Of course for this you need to ignite yourself. But back then this debuff lasted only for 3 to 4 seconds. So you always had to morph a lot in the arena, which drained also a lot of stamina. And since the boss used way more fury and wrath attacks in this version, stamina management became really crucial in this fight. For the geyser, these were exploding also way faster. You always had to be in the middle of the arena and constantly look out for the bubbling geyser. And there was no way at the beginning that you would survive on the ground, you would always die. Okay, but now you made it to the red phase. While similar to the current version, of course, first of all the duration you had to survive was way longer. But there was one additional brutal twist to it. If any player failed here on the mechanic, the entire group would wipe. And you had to survive this mechanic 2 to 3 times in the beginning. And if then after an 8-minute fight, one player is doing a small mistake, everyone would be killed just instantly. It was both hilarious but also incredibly frustrating. And I forgot to mention that he's actually being invisible in this phase when he drops below 50% HP. But all these small details made this fight just really hard. Okay, now Valley of Slaughter was considered the easiest 2-star dungeon, but it still required some coordination, so most of the mechanics remained the same, just with higher damage. So for example, you always had to freeze here the boss to cool him down. Or there would be always one player who would die here on the mechanic. Okay, so first of all a lot more damage. However, the sheep mechanic was completely different. Now it's just really ridiculous simple, right? You just have to kill a sheep? That's not even a mechanic. But in the original version it was far more complex. two players would be connected by a laser, and if they moved too far apart from each other, the laser would always break. Okay, now you needed this laser to kill all of the sheeps in the arena. Yes, there was not only one sheep, but 8 sheeps. So all of the other players of the team had to get the sheeps towards the laser quickly. And then the last sheep dropped this yellow orb we know also from our current version. But if you missed even one sheep, the orb wouldn't appear. And of course then he would do his jump and would wipe the whole team. So that was for sure the easiest of the major mechanics from all the 2-star dungeons. But it was still 20 times harder than what we have now. And then there was also a mechanic where you had to kill a black sheep in time. But that's then also about it. Okay, then finally let's talk about Carmine Rage Island. So most of the stuff here was also similar, but again the major mechanic had some twist to it which made it way harder. So in the original version the chain mechanic was far stricter. You couldn't stretch the chain as easily, and if you stretched the chain it will always deal constant damage to you. This meant the healer always needed to be free to move around to keep everyone alive. Everyone would always just get so much damage in the beginning. And you really needed to time all of your heals to actually keep everyone full. And you also had to time your movement perfectly. If you started running even a little late, the boss smash attack would always kill you. But if you started too early, you would die because of the damage you are getting by stretching the chain. So it was important to always understand who will be the first smash, who will be the second smash, and so on. Reacting in real time was nearly impossible, just because the timing between the smashes was much shorter. And additionally, if the chain would break, you would be always stunned for 8 seconds. Means if you go in the wrong direction, so in the direction where the next smash will be, you would just always die. So as for all of the other dungeons, you needed way more coordination, and everyone has to play this role correctly. So these dungeons were definitely not beginner friendly or casual friendly, but the feeling of finally beating them after hours of attempts was unbeatable. Luckily we are getting some of those mechanics soon back in the dimensional trials. So I didn't even mention here all of the changes, but most of the mechanics will have a comeback. But some of them are a little bit nerfed. One thing that I didn't mention in this video, but was actually really impactful, was the enrage timer. You always had an enrage timer from 7 to 9 minutes, depending on the dungeon you are doing. And since everyone dealt way less damage because we had no skill specialization, there was always this fight against the time. And I personally really liked that. You always had to think about how can I squeeze out a little bit more damage, how can I play this mechanic even better, and so on. That meant of course with some players you wouldn't be able to make the dungeon, and that's of course too much for a basic version of a dungeon, but yeah, I just like the idea of a fight against a timer. So what do you think of the current dungeons? Are they too easy? Too hard? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching and see ya in the next one.